So please help me in welcoming and congratulating Carl and Joan Tomoff.
Thank you, Tom, for a great introduction. As you can see, this is a slice from our rather extensive biology library, and you might have these same plants or these same books on your shelf, and we think, why do we need another plant book? Well, let's see, and I wrote this out. Okay, so I'm here to tell you something about our process and our reasoning, and then Carl is going to actually talk about the book itself. So despite, I took systematic botany in Michigan in the 60s. And then we moved here because, well, we moved to Arizona and Carl got this job, but I didn't really know the plants despite living with him. And I found these books like Arizona Flora. That's a great big book. Arizona is big and varied, and this has even like ephemeral composites, just really tiny little plants. It's too much for me. McDougall is limited to northern Arizona, but it's still a bunch of keys, and I found it really hard to use. Carl has worn out at least one copy. I think this is maybe only his second one, but he has one in the car and one in the house. He uses it a lot, so for just about everything. The rest of these are a little bit more reasonable. This Low, he was one of Carl's mentors. That's nice and skinny. I kind of like a skinny book because it fits in the backpack and it's not too heavy. So anyway, I could identify very few of the plants. As a casual hiker who wanted just a little more information, they were too much for me. Let's see, the skinny ones might be better. So then it so happened, about a dozen years ago, Oscar Clark, who was a naturalist or a botanist we spent some time with in 1970, just happened to live next door to our son in Riverside, California. And he was writing a book with a team that was a culmination of his life's work. And one member of the team said, you know, we're all botanists and we don't really feel comfortable with our writing. Could you guys edit this book? And we said, oh, sure. Took about a year. This is, you can see this is page 330 and it's not even close to the end of the book. Here's Oscar in the field. But they scanned a lot of these plants. Technology had developed enough so that you could take scans. And I like that idea, but not exactly the way they did it. And notice they have scale. We don't have any scale in ours. We don't even mention plant family. So our book is very different. But after we had edited that book for a year, we decided we could write a book like this about Prescott, and let's just do woody plants. And so we did. So the next slide, okay. So I had retired from teaching high school teaching, and I was teaching biology 100 at Yavapai College. So I had the time to take classes. I took digital photography, I took Photoshop, and I learned, we bought a scanner, an Apple computer with a big screen. I mean, we really outfitted ourselves to do this project. And then Carl also had, he was still teaching full time, but he had a sabbatical during that time, and so his sabbatical project was to focus on writing this book. And that included taking me into the field and helping me learn all the woody plants. So I really wrote this book for myself, like an interested hiker, and what do I want to know about what I'm seeing? Okay, and then of course there's a picture of me, so there has to be a picture of Carl. And this is, you can see him. Whoops, sorry about that. I see they told me I pressed the wrong one. Right there. With fellow faculty members at the Institute of Desert Ecology down in the Catalina Mountains outside of Tucson. He taught there for 40 years with those naturalists. That was the best picture I could find of him with teaching. So let's see, yeah, and Tom already told you this. Carl spent 5 decades teaching natural history in Arizona, so he knows what plants are important in the area. He pretty much knows where to find them. He even drove a couple hours. We thought, oh, we need such and such a plant this summer while we were putting this together. He said, oh, okay, yeah. So he spent like 3 hours in the car to go get a certain photo that we needed because he knew where he could get one. We spent several years creating satisfactory images that illustrate our plants' annual cycles of leafing, flowering, and fruiting. We had thousands of photos, but after several years of experimenting with different formats, we still didn't have a clear vision for the book. We thought the images were our strength, so we seriously considered a big coffee table book, but we thought we'd have to self-publish it, and it's going to be really expensive, and maybe nobody will even want it. You know, maybe it's not quite as wonderful as we think it is. So we didn't want to take that risk. So we let it sit for a while. I just thought, I found this when I was looking for things to do. I thought, well, here's an idea for our layout, like which plants are we going to put together and which are we going to put where. And it doesn't matter if you can't read that, but this is just one of like 100 different ideas that we had for how we're going to put this book together. Okay, and then, so one of our original books was this one. This is, sorry. Okay, this is a narrow-leaf cottonwood here, these three, and here's a Fremont cottonwood, and all the rest of the page is Fremont cottonwood. I love this photo. It didn't make it into the book because where would you put it? You know, anyway, it didn't work. And this was really confusing. Like one of our feedback things was like, you can't have so many different images on the same page because people won't know what they're looking at. Oh yeah, they're right. Okay, I like this one too. Beautiful cotton all over the ground, but didn't make it. I don't think it made it into the book. So another iteration is, okay, we're going to use, and these are different plants, but we have skunk bush and desert olive, which look a lot alike, and we put two plants on the same page. You can see we still have the horizontal format. The facing page, the top half was all about skunk bush, the bottom half was all about desert olive. It's still kind of confusing, and I see some things wrong with this page. So then another one, okay, now we're going to make it vertical. It's still big. We had these in notebooks. It's still vertical format, but you can see, oh, and the name, oh, it's not skunk bush anymore, it's fragrant sumac. Well, that happens. When you're working with plants, you decide which common name should we use, and this one was, turns out that fragrant sumac was more common and maybe a little bit nicer name than skunk bush. And then, since there was space on the text side, I put in some botany lessons. So I had already talked about galls somewhere else, so this is another look at galls. And I think they got conflated into one. So those are some of our different ideas for the book. Okay. Okay, okay, vertical format, okay. I am just about finished. Meanwhile, Tom had moved over here. He told you that we did some presentations at Prescott College. He'd moved over here, and it turned out this summer they had an intern, an undergrad from Stanford, not a biology major, and we thought, oh, this is good because everybody who's helped us with this, and I forgot I was going to mention a whole bunch of people. We did this, like we took all the pictures and we wrote the text, but we asked for help from a whole bunch of people, and I don't want to forget anybody, I'm sorry. I wrote all your names here, okay, in alphabetical order. Especially Carl's colleagues, Walt Anderson, Tom Fleischner, Lisa Floyd-Hanna, and Mark Riegner. They reviewed the text for us. Rebecca Davis and Kathy Krieger are both professional artists, and they gave us feedback on layout and presentation. And then Kathy took one of the original horizontal format books, and she took it out to her yard and tried to use it to identify some plants successfully. She said, oh, I was wrong about some of the plants in my yard. And she has a large yard. So large yard full of interesting woody plants. So this is Melina Walling, who was the intern this summer, and Tom's, in a meeting with Tom, we all decided we need to have this convenient, like, field guide format. And Melina learned to use Adobe InDesign, I think, in about 5 minutes. And she redesigned it. So she moved all of our images around, and she moved the writing around. And so we ended up with our fine redesigned book, which Carl is going to talk to you about right now.
everybody. Thank you for coming tonight, especially considering the weather as it is. Oh, hello, microphone. How are you tonight? It's got a frosty mustache or beard right there. I don't know what it is. Anyhow, so thank you for coming. Climate and landscape interact to produce patterns of vegetation. Plants, in turn, provide resources for animal life and people. I've been fascinated with looking for connections in the world and sharing them with people throughout my life. This is the culmination of several years of work and inspiration, and I thank Joni for being part of it. Crucial, we couldn't have done this without, it couldn't have been done without her. We are really fortunate to be living in one of the most spectacular places in the United States, let alone the world. The aesthetic beauty of our region and the ecological complexity and diversity are staggering and awe-inspiring. This is a map of showing the recently delineated Mogollon Highlands. The Natural History Institute, another reason why this is such a rewarding situation is that the Natural History Institute is focusing on the Highlands as part of its mission in the world, beyond the broader one of integrating the arts, sciences, and humanities. So to have our first field guide, hopefully more than one, to show that area within the red. And it's sort of like Canada meets Mexico. It's a biologically and physiographically diverse region, and as such provides a remarkable opportunity for both recreational and serious artistic and scientific study. The border that it runs against, let's see here, the Mexico-Canada situation, actually referring that, what I mean by that is that the Rocky Mountains sort of reach their southern extent in the eastern, above the eastern part of the Mogollon Highlands, and also from the Sierra Madre, the biota are related from the Sierra Madre Mountains of Mexico, the Sky Islands, the Rincon. These are various sky islands in the southeastern part of the state, very popular tourist and ecological visiting centers. So here's Mexico, and Canada is way up there, but the idea of Rocky Mountain fauna is part of the extension of Canadians. We have Chaparral, which is related to in California. I'll talk more about that in just a minute. But the highlands range from Kingman all the way down into New Mexico. It's got mountains, valleys, canyons, streams, rivers, all in a congested, limited area. So climate and landscape produce patterns of vegetation. Here's one example. The colors represent different types of vegetation. And we can define vegetation by a number of ways. One of them is structurally, by how many layers of vegetation occur above the ground. So the colors can represent montane forest, montane forest, woodlands below that, chaparral or shrublands, and finally into deserts with grasslands interspersed. So notice the key is cued into the different colors. But in a way then, the more you take a gradation of elevation from low to high on the landscape, you get more precipitation, so rainfall goes up, the temperatures go down, and the interaction of those two result in having plants evolve to fit those different climatic zones. So one manifestation of that is that with lower moisture, plants have adapted smaller size, reduced size for water loss, and reduced size for temperature gain. So in the lowlands, of which we have Sonoran Desert, Chihuahuan Desert, Great Basin Desert, Mojave Desert. So we have the highlands are flanked on all sides by eventually some of the deserts of North America. All four are represented within a short drive of our region. Going back to the precipitation temperature thing, We can sometimes express, or you can predict where a plant comes from on a relative scale by the size of the leaves. Here we have microphyls, very small leaves. The middle elevational belts, the leaves tend to be more small, medium sized, such as around Prescott. And then when you get higher with more water availability, macrophyls or large leaf trees and shrubs take over. So they're small, medium, and large, affiliated with the precipitation gradient. The species in our book are arranged in relative elevational sequence based on primary. Now, this map shows the colors, suggesting the plant communities are are sharply bounded. This isn't the case. One gradually blends into the other. I'd like to show you a simulation. Pretend this is the ponderosa pine belt. And there's pine forest from the first ponderosa pines are here. The main population is here. As we go up higher, eventually they thin out and disappear, and they're replaced by fir forest or mixed conifer forest. The other direction, the ponderosa pine forest, gives way to evergreen woodlands, which we'll talk about in a minute a little bit more further. But woodlands below, forest, and a different forest above. And that's what the colors show. But in reality, it's more like this. There's my hand for ponderosa pine. There's my hand for the evergreen woodland. And there's what's really happening in the world, not this. And where do the interdigitation or overlap is shown by individual species response, and that how far the finger goes between the belts can vary from place to place. But the idea then is that these zones are a transition from one belt to the next. And in our book, is it better? Should I start over? No, no. Let's move on. So I'm having fun with my hands here. But this it's one of the reasons that you can see this in the canyons where you have something called the slope effect. Canyons coming down. All right, and so let's make it one side's north facing, one side's south facing. All right. So the plants that are on the north facing side, would they be, and they're very different from the ones on the south facing side, would the ones facing north be more likely to be higher elevation plants than around the area, or lower elevation plants? Yes, because they are more water requiring. And so the north facing slope, which is cool and moisture, has plants from higher elevations. The south facing slope, which is drier and warmer, has limitations to prevent the colder lived plants from growing. So you have, at the same point in time, Hell's Canyon is a good one, just north of town. South facing side's got desert grassland with microphyls and grasses and succulents. The other side has got chaparral in the bottom, and now we can bring in canyon effect. The riparian zone with the extra water has a deciduous riparian forest in it with alders, ash, walnut, willow, cottonwood. So there's plants in the bottom that are distinct from either side or on the uplands. So this is the idea. North-facing slope is one finger. And yeah, I'll leave that. Get the idea. Deciduous riparian forests and woodlands are among the most diverse communities wherever they occur. Going back to the idea that I didn't finish earlier, I started by talking about layers of vegetation. And in the map of the vegetation, grasslands are generally considered, well, not generally considered, you can see that they have sort of one layer, mostly herbaceous. Sometimes shrubs, succulents can invade or be naturally part of it all. As it gets warmer, gets higher in elevation and wetter, you can start to bring in shrubs. So shrubs are a second layer, or ground shrub layer. As it gets cooler and wetter, more moisture falls, we can start putting in short trees. pinyons, junipers, and oaks. As it gets even wetter, now we can have taller trees, ponderosa pines, and eventually firs, and ultimately spruces in some habitats. So the layering of vegetation is one perspective to take, and it's a nice thing to consider as well as just what the plant is, it's where it grows in the community system. So those are the 3 layers. In this particular picture, not well shown, but you can see the different zones. This would be typical of a grassland area, 1 layer, shrub layer here and here, saplings and short trees here, and the big canopy forests here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Something else illustrated in this picture is something called slope effect. Did you notice? So which way, how did that get in there? That's interesting. Well, this is a mosaic. I'll just read what's there. There was this, and this is Chaparral facing north. This is the grassland over here facing south. Interesting. But so anyway, that's right. So that we have a different, in the book there's up in that corner, this is the horizontal picture, see? And the vertical picture, there it is. It's got, page 24. It's got the chaparral in the corner, and then right opposite is the grassland, like Chino Valley grassland. This is along Granite Creek near the Watson Woods riparian area. Okay, I'm going to flip along here. One of the things we did in the book was to put plants. We decided to, since we got 2 sides between the 2. In this case, what we've got are cottonwoods, which are in the same genus taxonomically. Aspens would be the crowning jewel up in the high elevation. It's also a populus. Whoops. That's the genus, populus, populus, populus. Aspen is Populus tremuloides, for trembling leaves. At any rate, part of what we're trying to do is to facilitate some almost information that you get by default, just by going through the book, and knowing that there's some similarities planned in. So here we have 2 cottonwoods, the Fremont, with big broad leaves, and the narrow leaf, with very willow. This is often mistaken for a willow. They can hybridize, and what they produce is something called, with the X, Hinckley cottonwood, which is intermediate. It was partly broad but partly narrow. So it's like many hybrids, but it shares characteristics of each of the 2 parent types. One of the other, so we can compare our leaves nice conveniently in a related group. Something else that this shows, and we try to do throughout the book, is to focus on reproduction as one of the topics that we illustrate. And in this case, the cottonwood tree is either a male or a female, and their flowers and fruits are separate on each separate tree. That is an uncommon situation compared with plants that have the flowers, male and female, on the same plant. Now, one of the other things that we did, Joni mentioned the little special botany lessons that she had written about. And here it says, Hinckley cottonwoods are hybrids of the cottonwood species. See page 57 to learn more about hybrids. Okay, there's page 57. And there's our little discussion of hybridization. Again, try to enrich and put in some variety of information besides purely identification material. Also, what you can notice is that this comes after the set of plates. So you saw an example of a plate with a few leaf characteristics or bark characteristics to help define it. Now we have topics such as the family, the distribution, flowers, fruits, and comments, which can sometimes include ethnobotany, as in this case. And then we end with etymology. What was the source of the scientific names? the genus and the species. So Fremontii, Mr. Fremont was a 19th century Army officer, etc. So this is one of the features of the book that comes next. I mean, involves plant community type by plant community type. Here we're going to go up an elevational sequence. So we're starting with, we don't have desert scrub in here because it's below the sort of arbitrarily defined limit, about 3,500 feet. You can have desert scrub at that elevation, but to put that in the book would make it even more, complex. So starting above the desert scrub, we could have desert grassland. In this case, there's acacias, there's mesquites out here. This is actually a great example of a mosaic. Mosaic being a combination of different types of things growing in the same region. So here is our linear riparian woodland transecting the grassland. But from the upper elevations, this bank right here is Chaparral, which has pockets like here and in here. And notice also a little few scattered junipers. Junipers are also found at higher elevations. So here's where you get an example of a high elevation species coming down to its limits, just becomes very scarce. Got to have the right growing environment to grow and become representative of the landscape. So mosaic is something that is a composite of parts, just like you think of an artistic one with red and yellow and white glass and a stained glass mosaic. These plants are part of are typical of desert scrub, but they're more cold hardy than some of the other desert scrub plants like the Palo Verde and saguaros, and that are too frost sensitive to occur at this elevation. So we don't have those here, but we do have desert grasslands with desert shrubs in them. Here's the catclaw acacia and catclaw mimosa. They both have curved prickles. Again, it's an example of not only juxtaposing two members of the same family, but here's an example. Oops. Sorry. To give something I didn't mention earlier was the fact that at the beginning of the book we have some basic botanical principles such as structure and function, photosynthesis, growth and reproduction talked about. And I had just mentioned the leaf microfill idea, and these are very small leaves, look at that. And example here is a prickle, which are like thorn-like structures. They're right there. And that's single versus paired. They're both curved. And they're both legumes, which are very significant in nitrogen fixing in the ecosystem. As you go higher in elevation, grasslands can include something called plains grassland. Many of those microfills that occur at lower elevation are now frosted out or frozen off, so they don't occur at higher elevations. This type of grassland is called plains grassland, and this is out north the edge of south end of Chino Valley. And you can see a slope effect here. Here's a north-facing side with chaparral on it, and there's a south-facing side with grassland. So the warmer, drier spot doesn't have enough rain for the shrubs. Chaparral is the next layer. Once you go above the grassy area, you'd start adding shrubs. Now it's a medium-sized leaf-dominated, tough, hard-leaved plants. The slide that Joni showed earlier with sumac and the desert olive, those are two of the they're common, but there are not very many deciduous shrubs in the chaparral. It's defined as an evergreen-dominated vegetation type. You can see an example of drainage effect. Can anybody see the riparian element in there? Whoops, I'll get this. That's a leafless cotton. Well, you can tell it would be leafless cottonwood. Wintertime chaparral, thick, dense shrub, and then scattering at the lower level of woodland, which is in this belt, and then forest is above that. one of the most common shrubs in the chaparral is the scrub oak, which starts as a sequence as we go from chaparral all the way up into the mixed conifer forest of the high elevations. There are 4 oaks that are common in this area: scrub, emery, white, and gambles. And they sort out, relatively speaking, in that sequence. Scrub oak first. Then we get emery, which I don't illustrate, but it's in the book. The Arizona and the white oaks are side by side. But there's a relationship. We're looking for connections. Whoops. The mistletoe berries in oaks. This is a spectacular example of a well-infested oak. The mistletoe derives moisture and minerals from the plant and is considered a hemi-parasite because it doesn't just draw in total resources from its host. It does produce berries, regardless of which of those oaks. They all have winter ripening berries, hence the tradition we know about at Christmas time. And not only do people respond to it in that particular way, but birds, particularly western bluebirds, are highly dependent upon the berries for their winter survival. Thrushes and other relatives and mockingbirds in the desert, along with desert mistletoe and the oak mistletoe at lower limits, supports mockingbirds and phainopeplas in the wintertime. Going further up in elevation, this is the Madrean woodland. There's sort of 3 types of woodlands you could categorize. Generally, sometimes they're just put in a bigger belt of evergreen woodland, mixed evergreen. I'm sorry to say, the pygmy forest is another term for that. But this is the most, in many ways, most complex because it has oak combination in it. Emery and white oaks are in here. Pinyon pines and alligator junipers are somewhere in that mix. This is granite dells. But notice the 3 layers of shrubs. Shrub layer, open grassy, rocky area, and short trees. So we've got short trees, shrubs, and the 3-layer configuration I'd referred to earlier. Some places you can find the evergreen woodland belt, and it'll be same color on some of these maps that are colored with vegetation notations. But this is a pinyon woodland. Pretty much no oak, no juniper. There are places like Chino Valley grassland. As you go out toward Drake and Ash Fork, you'll get into just pure juniper woodland. Higher with more elevation, more water, pinyons are now able to survive. You can have pinyon juniper there, still no oaks. And these woody plants are often very useful because they're sort of indicators of what other kinds of things that can occur. The herbaceous plants, and then for wildlife, there are sometimes plant-animal relationships that it's good to know about just by knowing the botany. The pinyon woodlands, just briefly, if we go back, I won't do it, we go all the way back to the big map. The pinyon pines are very interesting, and we have a nationally recognized pinyonologist here and fire ecologist. I'll put my razor, no. And so Lisa has been studying pinyons and pinyon woodlands for decades, and it's been wonderful to know what she's learning. At any rate, if we were to look at this, why the Mogollon Highlands is such a diverse area is that it actually has 3 pinyon pine complexes affiliated with it. In the northwest, like Kingman and under the Great Basin of California, there's a single leaf pinyon species. Through the core of the highlands and up into Utah and Colorado, there's a 2-needle pinyon. And as you go down to the Sky Islands and into the Sierra Madres of Mexico, there's a 3/8-needle pinyon. And the pinyonologists are all sort of discussing this whole complex, and they have lots of interesting discussions, I'm quite sure. But at any rate, we illustrate the pinyon pine, the 2-needle type I just mentioned in the notes, that there's an interesting complex of pinyons. Here's an example of not generic similarities. Cupressus is cypress, juniperus is juniper. But look at the leaf. This is a male cluster of cones producing pollen. Here's a cypress. So we compare this. These are easily misidentified. Another pair, Utah and one-seed junipers, are also very similar to each other. There are various ways you can tell them apart. But what I also want to point out is the alligator juniper, with the bark like an alligator skin, is actually a good example of a Madrean species that can coexist with a Great Basin or Rocky Mountain systems. The Utah and one-seed are northern junipers, and the alligator juniper is a southern juniper. And so we have them fingering in from their complexes. For those bird watchers in here, a good example of birds that are Madrean versus Great Basin. The juniper titmouse in the north and the bridal titmouse in the south. You can go to places where you'd only find one of those, right in the heart. Again, this idea. And in Prescott, the Mogollon Highlands, and in the other way, you can get the juniper titmouse and you can get the bridal titmouse. So this idea of overlap applies to animal life as well as to plant life. Moving up the scale. Ponderosa pine forest, again, just put it in one category as an oversimplification, because again, as you go from the lower limits of the pine forest to the fir forest above it, you get elements of the lower elevation communities fingering into the pine forest itself. But this picture illustrates the stratification idea again. Canopy, understory trees, limited shrub cover, open ground cover. So there's a structurally more biomass there than there is in the Chaparral belt of comparable. It depends on actually the treatment of the forest now, how much biomass there is. But in this area, this would have emery oak, white oak, emery oak, some juniper. This slide shows one of the oaks, the final oak in the sequence, the Gamble oak, is deciduous. All the other oaks are evergreen, and they're adapted to this Madrean, this dry southwest weather. Interestingly, the male flowers emerge prior to the female flowers, and they grow after some new shoots appear. So you have this old branch, the male flowers are produced, and then as the season progresses, the new shoot comes out and the female flowers come out. So they're actually separate flowers, but they're on the same plant. Whereas the desert ceanothus, the feather ceanothus, has flowers with both male parts there and female parts in the center. That's typical of most flowers, have both of those. We don't deal with flowers in any great detail in the book. I'm going to wrap up pretty quick soon here. This is the next level forest up near Mount Union, but it occurs in the high peaks throughout the whole Mogollon Range where the elevation is above 7,000 feet or so. You see some colored blotching in there. That's not evergreen. These are Gamble oaks, aspen, which can perform the succession function. When there are clearings for fire, disease, or something like beetle thinning or fire or forestry, these two plants, and locust is a third one, that can occupy a region and provide the conditions for germination of the original types of trees to follow in at some other point in the future. Conifers bear cones, and one of the things that you learn when you go through the whole array of fir, spruce, pine, junipers actually have cones that look like berries. But in the cone crop situation, the Douglas fir is one that's got very distinctive little wings, bracts coming out, which is the white fir doesn't. These persist on the tree well after they're dry. These actually stand upright and disintegrate the winter and fall apart, scattering their seeds at that time. Here's a little phrase: firs are flat and friendly, spruces are square and sharp, pines come in packets. So that is, pines usually have a little bundle tissue holding needles together wherever they are. And they have various cross-sectional design. Firs are typically flat, And spruces are actually square in cross section and have sharp tips. Incidentally, there are no spruce in Spruce Mountain or West Spruce Mountain or in Yavapai County. They were here in a Pleistocene, but they're not here now. Too warm. And it could be that not too far future, our fir forest we just looked at, maybe pine stand rather than fir. Well, I'd like to thank you for coming, and I hope you enjoy the book. We both hope that we can open doors to your enjoyment of the Mogollon Highlands and the areas beyond that. Thank you for your attention.